Welcome to our weekly oral history program from the Village History Council of Rouses Point. I'm pleased to have Mr. Carl Lafontaine with us from Champlain with us today. I'm Donna Boyle, of course. Carl is a teacher that can look back to teaching in the one-room country school. He's still in the teaching field, but not in the usual way. But he will tell us about that as he goes along. Mr. Carl, I'll call you Carl. When and where did you start your first school?
Well, I graduated from college at the ripe old age of 26, and I started teaching in a country school in Perkins Mills, New York. That's just a little west of Champlain. That was in 1956 and 57 and 57-58 school year.
About how many children did you have in that?
Well, back then, we want to remember this was the transition, the transitional period when most of our rural schools were closed. Perkins Mills School was the last school to be closed in the Champlain Central School District of yesteryear. So it would have covered those 2 years.
But how many grades encompassed the school?
We went from grade kindergarten to grade 6. After that, any of the boys or girls would go to the centralized school district.
You know, I'm a teacher also, and I often wondered how you schedule so many varieties of grades in one day. How did you ever manage that?
I had to work at it. I always had a feeling that school, especially kindergarten and 6th grade, was just an extension of the home. That many parents, consciously or unconsciously, don't realize that they're the youngster's first teacher. I had a deep feeling when I went to Perkins Mills that I would be basically doing a lot of work with the 3 R's. I found that particular problems did arise in scheduling, and in time I had individual or small groups working amongst themselves. I had to have scheduled time for the boys and girls to do seat work, and then we had group activities along with art, music, health, science, and playground. Of course, today we have much of the rural schools in our centralized school. In some of the particular classes where you have core curriculum type of setup, you would see something like this. Boys and girls would be given a daily assignment sheet that when boys and girls are oral reading, other boys and girls, various class levels, would be doing written work or assignments. One little aid that I found was handy was to have little busy corners around the classroom. One corner might have library books. Another corner might be labeled the art corner. Another corner might be labeled the science corner. So after a month or so, I got everything scheduled, and I sort of rather enjoyed my experiences in a country school.
A lot of preparation on your part, wasn't it?
An awful lot of preparation, and it sort of geared me for what I spent the last 30 years in doing.
I know how the modern school works, and we have such a variety of materials. How did you manage for books and supplies in a small room like that?
Well, the teachers that were at the Perkins Mills School had done a fantastic job in getting books. We had an awful large library. There was an abundance of reading, writing, math books, and I was sort of left as a person to just know how to utilize these materials. If we needed any particular materials, the centralized school district would provide them.
I see. You still had an advantage there.
Right.
You must have had some funny happenings in the schools with a variety of children.
We really had some funny happenings, and I can recall the last day of school that were going to have there before it was to be closed forever and ever, that I had prepared my register the day before and had put it in the desk. And the next day, when the children had left and I was ready to bring my register down to Mr. Meyer, who was the district principal at the time, that when I opened my locked desk, lo and behold, my register had been eaten through by some mice. And those pesky little creatures made about 5 hours of work for me. I had to copy the whole register over again. And you can rest assured from that time onward I never had too much to say about mice. Another interesting thing that happened in the last day of school, one of the local folk came over and took my hand quite vigorously and said, "You know, you're the best teacher we've had up here in such a long time." And I was sort of in a quandary as to why he would say that, because he had never been to the school before. So I questioned him and I said, "Why do you think I was the best teacher that you've ever had up here?" And he said, "You know, Mr. L," he says, "ever since you've been here, I've never seen one person jump out of the window." And so I've always figured I've been a pretty reasonably good teacher, using that as a guideline.
We know the advantages of a consolidation of schools, but are there any, do you still think there were a lot of good points about the old school?
Oh, I think there are a lot of good points about the old school. It certainly eliminated the buses. I think that the moms and the dads had a far greater identity with the schools than what they have today. I sort of feel that the boys and girls had a much stronger esprit de corps about their school and themselves. And one of the big side effects in the country school was that the older boys and girls, at least in the classes that I ran, were given the opportunity to become teachers themselves. They would help many of the younger boys and girls in some of their classroom activities and tasks, and many times they would set the tone, show the good example, and show many of the other people or acted as role models for them.
And I remember that my mother used to tell, she went to school in Vermont, the early schools, and that's one thing I remember her speaking about, how she enjoyed helping the little ones, and they always worked as a family and as a team.
Right.
So that's very strong.
It was almost like teaching right in the home. We had, like I say, 12 to 14, 15 children, and it was really a true extension of the home as I see it.
Well, it had to be someone with a warm personality like yourself to make it work, though. I'm quite sure. What did you do after the school closed? By the way, you brought some books, some very old books. Would you like to show them?
Sure. Part of the library that we had in Perez Mills included quite a few old books. And I have with me today a cross-section of them. Here is a book that is titled The Rational Method in Reading, and here they're talking about teaching the phonetic approach to reading. They're talking about teaching the word approach to reading. This approach to reading isn't as modern as what many people think. Here's an example of this 1900 book. This would be on first grade level. I have here an applied physiology book, about 1900, and I'm going to read to you a little article in here concerning tea and coffee. I want to remember now, 1900. What did people think about this? Or at least the person who wrote this book thought about it. Many persons who use tea and coffee do not feel well without them. They stimulate the brain to greater exertion, but when their use is stopped, the brain feels its weariness. Then another cup is needed, and so a habit of their use is formed. They often produce headaches and disordered stomachs, and so the habitual use weakens the whole body, including the brain. They often produce nervousness and sleeplessness. They should be regarded as drugs and not as food. Young people, especially, are easily harmed by their use. Applied Physiology, 1900. I have another book that follows the same vein, How to Keep Well, 1902. And we all think we're pretty sophisticated today. And here we have a picture of artificial respiration, 1902 version. We have step 1, which would be on your left, and step 2, which would be on your right. This book is a brief history of the United States, 1885. A few pictures in this book might be worthwhile. Notice the beautiful print, the engraving that we have in this particular book. Another picture, we see Sherman's army on its march to the sea. I particularly enjoy this picture. This book is titled How the World is Fed. And How the World is Fed was written in 1923. Here we see a picture of a steam plow.
Probably one of the first, huh?
Probably one of the first. Another interesting picture, and something that I was never aware of. Here we see a camel used to reap wheat in Asiatic Russia. A Primary History of the United States, 1901. A colonial fireplace. Notice how clear the engravings are. In many of the schools today, we see this picture of George Washington.
Gilbert Stuart, right?
That may be, I do not know who the...
Yeah.
Here is an oldie, Fry's Elements of Geography, 1898. Here we see a boat in Savannah, Georgia.
How did you happen to save so many books like
There
that?
were a few that interest me. I was really supposed to be a social studies teacher, and so I sort of had a knack for this. I wanted to show this one particular picture here of a southern cotton mill and shipping cotton to Memphis. Notice all the fibers in this picture. This is the first one I have ever seen. It's just fantastic.
What did you do after the school closed?
Well, just prior to the time that the school had closed, I had a visit from Dr. John Harrell, who was the district superintendent of the schools, and he offered me a job. And I couldn't understand why a district superintendent would be concerned about me being in a little country school. And he said that there had been a survey taken in Clinton County about the feasibility of starting programs for the blind, legally blind, and partially sighted. I told him I would take an evening to think about it and share my thoughts with my wife about whether or not I should take that job. And at that time, I needed a job, and I wasn't quite desperate, but I was interested in making teaching a profession. And so the following morning, I called Dr. Harrell and said that I would take this job. I've never regretted it.
Before we go on, I want you to explain that we're listening to the oral history program project from Rouses Point. Mr. Carl Lafontaine is talking now about his work with the visually handicapped. Carl?
Well, we want to remember that traditionally in our country that blind boys and girls were educated in schools that specialized in this. With the advent of incubators, there was such a rash of blind children in the United States that many of the boys and girls had to be educated or mainstreamed, as we know it, into the regular classrooms with the boys and girls. This particular program that we have in Clinton County started in 1959, or the fall of 1958. It's called the Itinerant Teacher Plan. And in this particular type of system, the student with the visual impairment is enrolled in a regular grade in the school nearest his home. Now, a person like myself would help the child in braille skills, mobility skills, and you want to remember that this child associates with the children in his own neighborhood, and he benefits from the regular teacher as well as a teacher like myself. The entrance requirements for this program are pretty simple. We certainly always want our blind, legally blind, and partially sighted children to have a good eye examination by an ophthalmologist, optometrist. Certainly somebody, if there is some vision, we would encourage these youngsters to visit low vision lens clinics that specialize this type of child or who has this type of vision. The children that we work with should have the sufficient mental, social, and emotional development to profit from this instruction. Most of our boys and girls in this area have been premature youngsters who were given excessive oxygen in incubators. This disease is known commonly as RLF, retrolental fibroplasia. Literally, the retina will close up. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly what do you do when you visit their homes? Or do they come to the school to you?
Each child is different. If we get a parent that's apprehensive, we might spend quite a bit of time at home. You want to remember that these youngsters are identified very shortly after birth by the committees on special education in your local school district. That our BOCES program does pick up physically, mentally, and emotionally handicapped children at 3 years old. So we actually work with the children from 3 years old through high school.
You visit the homes when they're younger, of course.
We can visit the homes when they're younger, once they become of school age. But once they're in preschool, we work right with the preschool teachers, and no two youngsters are the same. We work where the needs are. As a child progresses, we show the youngsters how to read with their fingers and to write with their fingers. We prepare specialized material, or we might research our catalogs and so forth to get the same books, the same materials as any other boys and girls. In other words, if anybody had a straight normal youngster in the classroom, there would be certain books, certain workbooks, certain teacher worksheets. Part of my job is to make sure that that blind child has the same as the other boys and girls.
They often have other problems too, I imagine.
In the past few years, we've had children with many, many problems. You might be blind, you might be have cerebral palsy, you might have a little hard of hearing, and this sort of thing.
You brought quite a few things, materials to help the children with. Would you show them to us?
Right. I have with me a language master. A language master is a device that was used primarily by speech teachers for many years. It's better known as a card reader. Here is a card from a language master. You will notice that this particular card has a tape across from it. I use this as a teaching aid for youngsters, and here I brought some cards showing where I am teaching alphabet. You will notice that right here there is a little line. We might remember that Braille is an embossed type of writing. The little line would indicate up or top. On this card it would say A. Now, prior to the time that a youngster would get this card, I would have showed him what an A looks like, or a B, or a C, or a D, and I use this primarily for quiet work. It has a jack for an earphone. The youngster would take the card from a pile and look at it. A, he would say A to himself, then he'd put it in the machine to see if what he read was what he read. Let's listen.
Pretty clear enough, isn't it?
Now the youngster would take the next card. He'd say, C. Is this a C? He would put it in the machine.
B.
Oh, a B. The child beforehand would know that all the cards that he would know would go on the right, all the ones that he didn't know would go on the left, and then through a process of elimination, we would work with just the cards that we didn't know. You can use this for teaching alphabet, for teaching words, for adding and subtracting, multiplication, and division facts. It's a fantastic machine. We use it all the time. Another little device that I have right here, audio device, is, and this is a Sharp LC-Mate EL620. It's a talking calculator. Very handy. I'm not blind, and I use it all the time. Let's listen closely.
9, 5 times 6, 3, 5, 9, 8, 5.
Now, this device, if the youngster did not pick up that the answer was 5985, we have a repeat on it.
5985. 987 divided by 3. 329.
Interesting. I'd like one of those too.
Another device that we have is a light sensor. Now, to explain to a totally blind person what light is not that easy. And this little light sensor is nothing more than a device that would translate intensity of light to a shrill sound, dimness of light to a low sound. Let's listen. I'm going to be shining it at a light. Another device that's frequently used in the school would be this cassette player. Now, I had a little youngster a few days ago teaching the sounds of animals, and let's listen to this. Morning. We're going to take a few minutes of our precious time, and we're going to be trying to imitate some of the many animals' sounds that we're familiar with, and we'll do this by me telling a little story. Now tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Here we go. Once upon a time, there was a farmer. His name was John. His wife's name was Matilda. Farmer John worked very, very hard, and he loved to go to bed at night to get a good night's sleep so he could get up in the morning. One night, while he and his wife Matilda were sleeping, he heard the dog barking outdoors. This particular narration goes on where the farmer goes out and he finds that there's a snake in the chicken coop, and as I would say every animal, the youngster would imitate it. This is the end of the visual materials. I have with me a slate. When Louis Braille invented Braille, he devised this sort of instrument. This is called a slate. And along with the slate, we have a stylus. It's so interesting because Louis Braille was a sighted person, and he was helping his father in a harness shop, and he happened to press a little hard on the leather with an awl, and the awl went right into his eye, and this is how he went blind. This little device would have a little piece of paper inserted inside of it, and you would write on it from right to left. Now here I'm going to be writing my name, capital C-A-R-L. Notice that I wrote from right to left, because when I write from right to left, this device, this paper turns left to right. The next device I want to show you is the Perkins Brailler. This is probably the most versatile machine around. This Perkins Brailler little device, we'd stick our paper in here. If I wanted to write, this is Rouses Point, it would sound something like this. I live in Champlain.
Very interesting, Carl. But we have to, our time is up now. I'm so glad you showed us all these things that help the blind. Thank you very, very much.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been very interesting. And again, we want to thank Mr. Castine, Channel 21, for promoting these programs. Thank you very much.